Right. Yes. Welcome back. On stage we have Dan, ready. And your talk, Journey of a Django Application, from startup to scale up to enterprise. Can you do that in 25 minutes?
I try. Maybe I will start talking really fast, but that's like to get through all my slides. So
Let's give Dan a big hand.
all right, thank you. So yeah, my name is Daan Vielen. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm a developer at Box. And Box is a US company from Redwood City, California, but they also have an office in Amsterdam. And they were very kind to let me travel today to Copenhagen to tell you all a nice story. So, being at the Django conference, I will tell a bit about Django. So Django was and is still the technical backbone of the sign application for Box. The company bought sign requests, and sign requests went from a bootstrapped startup to being a scale-up to being acquired by a big company. But first, I want to talk about me. So, my first professional Django project I did 10 years ago. So I was hired as a freelance developer to create a backend for a typing course. It's a type course for kids under 12 to learn how to type with the help of Donald Duck. And the front end, it was implemented in Flash. So show of hands, who knows Flash still? Okay. It's quite some people still who can remember this. Nowadays it's all replaced with hip JavaScript frameworks. But basically from that moment in 2012, all my freelance gigs were done in Django. So fast forward a couple of years, I got a call from one of the founders of this company, signrequest.com, it's still live, that they needed a Django developer. So SignRequest does e-signatures, so you upload the PDF, say I want a signature there and there from this person, you fill in an email address, and up it goes, and then you get a digital signed document that actually holds up in court. And for me personally, I was happy to start working in a startup that was ready to scale up, or actually that was able to pay me. So that. So I was one of the first hires for SignRequest, and it gave me some very nice insights how a tech stack can change, like with how the company grows. So Django at SignRequest in the early days. So, but first let me tell a bit about why Django is very good for a startup. So, at a startup you need to be quick on your feet. So in the early days, early stage of a company, it can change per day for what is important. And the direction of the company can pivot quite quickly. So it's important to have a framework that allows you to enable for that. And also one thing really nice about Django are the batteries that are included. Don't have to tell this audience, but like their session management, ORM, database migration, file storage, all those components, they are following a shared nothing principle of architecture that will make it easy to swap it out depending for your needs at what your application needs. And having that clear separation between those different parts means it can also scale for increased traffic by just adding hardware at any level. So if you have problem with your database load, you can just add more hardware to your database. If you have problem caching servers, application servers. So it is very scalable, and that's also what it proved to be in the years that from the start. One thing that's also very nice about Django, and in the early days, it's secure by default. it's incredibly easy to make a mistake if you start implementing encryption for your password yourself. So by default, by just using the default components, it protects developers for SQL injection, clickjacking, cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting. Django just takes care of that. And it takes care of the boring stuff in web development. Like, why would you want to write your own URL parser? I don't know, but people sometimes do. You can really focus on just adding value to the company. You can focus on writing features that brings in new customers and that make the company grow. Oh. And one of the best things about Django, in my opinion, it is boring. It is proven technology. It has been around for many, many years. It has been proven to, like, big companies are built on this technology. It's like been around so many times. There's a process for everything. There's a process for vulnerability reports, etc. That you don't get with all those new hip frameworks that are just barely started with. Also, of course, will be use cases to use those, but for a base of a company, this is like really good. So, with all those batteries included, Django comes with a big set of features that you don't need to write for yourself. So, as you can, if you want to, you can decide to write your own caching framework. Okay, but who would want to? Especially in the early stage. So, this is also one of the things that people often don't like about Django. So developers feel like, oh, it's so much extra weight. I only need this small endpoint, so I just use it in Flask. Oh, I need the database, I use SQL Alchemy. Oh, I need the template, I use Jinja. So in the end, often they are just building their own Django, but without the defaults that other developers know how to use, and it will be very difficult to add new developers to that self-invented stack. Okay, so back to sign request. So sign request used in the early days many of those features. One of them is obviously the Django admin. So the Django admin was used for support until like quite recent. In the end, it was replaced by a custom support dashboard where it was more focused around the customer instead of around database tables. But this worked really well in the early stage, and so there was no developer spending a month on writing a support database dashboard, and that developer can spend time on adding new features, what brings in new customers. Also, yeah, you can imagine sign request. It handles a lot of files. This was also very easily implemented by just using the Django storages and having a file field. Not much time and effort needed to be used in implementing that. We could just focus on adding code and value. Okay, one thing that sign request didn't use were the Django templates. So from the beginning on, there was like a front-end framework used. So Angular was the first front-end framework that was used. Spoiler alert, there were more frameworks used over the years. But also the backend code was not more complicated than needed at that time. It just returned to JSON. So if we go back to the batteries included, basically sign requests use everything except templates, forms, and the message framework. All those other things, they had a place in the infrastructure. So then sign requests became popular. So it started like this. So we have like a couple of users, a web server, and a database. So then we got a lot of users. So that one web server was not able to do everything anymore, and it was like, we needed to scale extra hardware. So then, okay, you add a load balancer and more servers. Merging all the PDFs, like the signatures needed to be merged in a new PDF, a certificate needed to be applied, emails needed to be sent. Doing all that from a web server was also not very scalable, so of course we started using Celery with a Redis queue and workers looking at the Redis queue if there was a task for them to do. So there were like, infrastructure started looking like this. So a lot of web servers and a lot of background task servers that take care of those things. Some tasks are more important than other tasks. For instance, if a customer decides to send out 10,000 PDFs for all their customers to sign, you don't want to get that clogging up your whole queue. So we decided to go with low priority tasks, high priority tasks, so that we can extra server capacity to high priority tasks, a bit less to the low priority task. And in the end, we all made this auto-scaling. Because in this day and age, you can just go to AWS and say like, oh, give me just as many hardware as I want for my customers, because, well, our business model actually works. So with AWS Fargate for autoscale, also the background task workers, they were scaling based on the number of messages in the queue. So if there was like suddenly 10,000 documents to be signed, that automatically new servers were added to the queue. But in the end, it were all just containers with the Django code. So we didn't have 20 microservices that did all the stuff. No, it was still like this one monolith of Django code that did everything. So, and splitting those queues up didn't only make it easy to scale horizontally, it also made that you can define proper hardware for the job. So sending email doesn't need a lot of CPU, but converting a docx does. This is a stage where many companies decide like, oh, we need to do microservices. We decided not to, especially that microservices, they solve a lot of things. One of them is like, you can handle the load better by scaling the services independently, but we already had that covered. And also, it doesn't really make sense if your team is like 6 people big. So with a small team, there was like no advantage in going to microservices. It would only add extra complexity to the code base. Because in the end, it was just like writing Python code. So if you had like a task that needed to send out an email, you just added like, okay, this is an email task, and the infrastructure itself would solve it. So there was like no incentive for us to build a send this email microservice. Another thing that happens when a company grows is we make more customers. You get requests from companies to connect their single sign-on service of choice. Also, Django, together with social auth, brings this more or less out of the box. So, in the end, this is basically how the batteries included situation look like. Yes, we still use all those things, but we extended authentication with the social auth. So the admin, we extended with a custom customer dashboard. Sessions, we modified it to provide extra location info, where we could send an email to a customer like, hey, we haven't seen you logging in from this IP address before. is this all okay? That are you really in North Korea? So, yeah. So the file upload we extended with S3. Testing, it was like a mix of the default Django test and PyTest. Sending emails, okay. Custom background tasks to plans on emails at certain points. And, well, the front end, we rewrote everything to work in Vue. Then, Django at box sign. Developing software with a big team makes a big difference because Sign Request had 9 developers and Sign at the moment has 30, but Box itself has 2,500. So we were becoming part of this big corporation. So also funny story, like I left the company Sign Request. I went to work for another company as being a freelancer for a year, and then one of the founders told me like, hey, please don't take any new freelance jobs. We need you soon. Something really cool is happening. And then a couple of days later, I read in the newspaper, Box bought Sign Request. So I congratulated everyone. But yeah, they said like, okay, we have 3 months to get this application of Sign Request in Box. And we can use all the help. So we need to integrate everything. And yeah, so where I was saying about the microservices, so in the end, Sign is like a microservice now in the Box infrastructure. So it all has to do with scale. So it's like at that scale, it makes sense to have like a Sign microservice. And also like with that many developers working on it. Also, one thing that's weird working for such a big corporation suddenly is that, yeah, you can read about the feature you're working on in Bloomberg. That like, okay, like next quarter we will release batch send, and I'm like, okay, I'm working on batch send. No pressure. So, but what did that do for the rest for our code? So, we were introducing files. So I don't know if everybody here knows Box, but Box is well, very good with files. It's their core business. So companies have super control about who can access their files and who not. It's file storage for the hospitals, accounting firms, movie studios, companies that are really, really in trouble if something bad happens to their files. So we were storing everything in S3, and we now needed to implement that to work with Box. And then suddenly you have to deal with a lot of events things that can happen with those files. So suddenly permissions can change on your file, shells can be shared, unshared, all those things you need to be aware of and what that does for your signature request. Because in the end, Box wanted just to have like your file explorer, right mouse click, I want a signature on that. So, one thing we also did to make this all work, we introduced a backend for frontend. So this is basically the things that we don't want to do in Django anymore, but we start using the Box system for that. So it's like authentication, that is done by Box. Like we don't want to have like a separate authentication for the Box sign project. Hydration of the file information, we didn't want to write our own permission structure. No, the BFF tells Django application, okay, this file, you can do this and this with. So really, roughly, the user talks with the BFF, and the BFF, they talk with the whole infrastructure at Box. So with authentication, our sign backend, all the files. And to scale that up, oh yeah, also one thing, the Box wanted us to have it in GCP, and we were in AWS. So instead of AWS Fargate, it now runs on GCP Cloud Run. All the workers are Cloud Run workers. The BFF is a Kubernetes cluster. And well, very simplified version, but then you have like the other service box you have to deal with, the permissions, the metadata of the files, search, shield that can protect your files. So for our Django application, it meant that we needed to make sure, hey, which user is talking to us. So that was like solved with a JWT token. And yeah, like we knew if the request came from the BFF and we can decode the JWT token, then for our servers, it's like a logged in user and we authenticate that user. So in our application, there was not more change than it still kept on working. So we can still do request.user everywhere. Async tasks, we moved that to GCP PubSub. It's like the GCP's version of the background tasks. We have like published two topics, and then you have a consumer sends it to a Cloud Run instance to handle the task. But in our code, we still have like the add task. We just offload it differently. So in the end, of all those batteries included, we still use the ORM, we still use database migrations, we still use the URL scheme, although it's now gated by the BFF. Authorization, well, that's done in the BFF. Caching, we only cache it locally, so there's no shared cache anymore. Testing, we added a lot of tests, a lot, especially end-to-end tests, because you suddenly have to be aware about files like being served from the box file system, how that can react. So you have to like add a lot of end-to-end tests on top of that, about all the lot of tests we already had, of course, in the backend and frontend. Internalization and localization is still done the same way. And even sending emails, although that will change soon. So for the future, we know we get more and more users. So Sign is getting adopted by the Box users more and more quickly. Plus we know that Box is growing, we know it will grow. So we also might reach the stage now, finally, that we might optimize by rewriting some of the Python functionalities in a different language. And we might end up in a situation where we will split a background task to become independent microservices, because other teams at Box want to use it. They also might want to sign a document, so it makes sense to create a mini sign microservice. We're currently investigating if we can replace the Django views with Fast API. That can also will be interesting. And we will be adding like a ton of more new features. That's it.
Thank you so much. And you finished perfectly on time.
I practiced.
Could learn something from that. That means there is time for questions. This one was first, I think, but by a millisecond.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the talk. I just want to ask about PubSub. You mentioned that you switched from Celery to PubSub, right?
Yeah.
But you're still using the task decorator?
Yeah, we still use the same way of calling it, but like the code behind it, it's all custom now. So we publish a message to PubSub, but we still wanted to have that benefit for our developers that they can just use a decorator. Okay, this method needs to run in a separate task. So we build a way around it. So not much of Celery is used anymore, but the interface of Celery we still use.
Yeah. So do you use your own Celery fork for that? or
Well,
what?
sort of. Like we basically intercept, like before it goes in the Celery system, we intercept the message before that, and then handle it from there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, great talk, thanks. In the last slide, you mentioned that you are considering moving from Django views to fast API.
Yes.
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 Why?
That's up for discussion. So we are investigating that. It's like I kind of like especially with types. I like how that is done there. So we're investigating if that's doable. So like it's more like also you don't have to use everything that Django provides. So everything is up the table that can be replaced if there are additional benefits. So we see some benefits, but we need to make sure they don't outweigh the negatives.
Hi, great talk. When you had this Django monolith that became bigger and bigger, how do you manage to separate the context, so avoiding that everything becomes a big blob of intertwined Django apps?
Great question. It's that is difficult indeed. It also made sure that the apps don't depend too much on each other. But in the end, it doesn't really matter because it's still the same Django container that runs at different places in the infrastructure. So the tasks, they can use everything that is in the monolith, but it just runs at a different place in the infrastructure depending on the needs. And you set optimizing still there for that specific task. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you. I think we, where I work, we're at this kind of the same situation. We haven't been bought or anything like that. And I think we have kind of the same observations that you have. About the optimizations, have you considered, things like PyPy or Cython or, some of these that, don't require you to, use a different language?
Yeah, for sure. Like and we definitely look at those kind of things. But it's also like a trade-off, and especially in the startup phase, do you start optimizing for 100 milliseconds faster performance, or do you spend the resources on building a new feature? And it's also like just simple economics. Like, is it worth letting the developer making this endpoint 50 milliseconds faster, or can we make that money back? So, but at the scale that Box is at, that we reach that point quicker because it's like more hardware is used and the bill of the hardware becomes more significant, and then an optimization like that can really be benefit.
Just an added question. Different language, what would that potentially be?
So, for instance, like merging the PDFs, we already do that in Java. I know Instagram replaced a lot of Python code with custom C code just to make it those milliseconds faster. Working at a bigger company, you know the roadmap better than at the startup, so you can really plan for what is needed and what is coming. So we have to find there the right balance in optimizing or not.
Yeah, I think those were the questions. So, another celebration of another talk. Thank you so much.
Maybe it looks bad how it's folding over the Django.
And we're just getting